There will be no new fuel taxes in Wyoming despite huge shortfalls. A Wyoming pastor miraculously survives in the wilderness. And despite the best efforts of 18 states, it's time to change the clocks again. We'll take a look at these stories and more today from Wyoming's largest news organization. I'm Wendy Core for Cowboy State Daily. The Wyoming Department of Transportation will have to find some new solutions for covering a budget shortfall of more than $400 million. On Friday, the state's Joint Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee discussed and killed two bill proposals that would have increased Wyoming fuel taxes to give WYDOT more money for road improvements. Cowboy State Daily's Leo Wolfson reports.
Both proposals were rejected when it was discovered that the compromise that was created from these bills, which would have basically eliminated or reduced registration fees in the state, would actually have cost WYDOT more of a deficit if these bills were passed.
WYDOT had recommended that the Wyoming legislature increase the state's diesel and gas fuel taxes, which are each at 24 cents. The increases would have been paired with reductions and elimination of registration fees to mitigate the hike for state residents. Well, last month, 4 doctors in Wyoming filed a proposed brief in an ongoing lawsuit arguing that abortion is not health care. The health care debate is the crux of a pro-choice group's lawsuit against Wyoming, in which a district court judge has placed a hold on the state's abortion ban. The plaintiffs want the court to declare that abortion is health care and therefore a protected right under the Health Care Autonomy Amendment to the Wyoming Constitution, but the 4 doctors who filed the brief don't agree, according to Cowboy State Daily's Claire McFarland.
4 doctors in Wyoming filed a proposed brief wanting to argue to the court that abortion is not health care, that that's illogical, and that it has devastating consequences for Wyoming's medical law if it's followed through to its logical conclusion. And in response, the pro-choicers that are suing Wyoming saying abortion is health care are saying, go ahead and let that brief into this case. Just give us 20 days to summon an argument against it.
Teton County District Court Judge Melissa Owens has not yet ruled on introducing the proposed brief. Well, farms in Ireland and other European Union countries are being forced to cut cattle numbers to reach climate change goals. U.S. Representative Harriet Hageman says those actions should raise alarms for Wyomingites, according to Cowboy State Daily's John Thompson.
Congresswoman Hageman gave some advice that in spite of that it's happening, thousands of miles away in different countries, we should be paying attention to these kind of things in Wyoming because it could happen here. There are politicians in this country that think along those same lines.
Hageman's concerns were raised in a recent column published by Fox News. In a news clip accompanying the column, an Irish politician said the plan to reduce cattle herds there will result in the country importing beef from Brazil, which will cancel out any positive effects on carbon emissions. I'll be back with more news right after this.
No one should go hungry on Thanksgiving, and yet hundreds of men, women, and children from our community are homeless and hurting this holiday season. Yet you can provide hope. Just $2.58 provides a hot meal and life-changing services at the Wyoming Rescue Mission, like safe, welcoming shelter, support, and long-term recovery to help them get back on their feet. Learn more and give online at wyomission.org. That's wyomission.org.
67-year-old Dan Mulholland didn't expect to get lost after nearly 50 years of hunting big game, but on the evening of October 25th, he got turned around in the rugged terrain in the wilderness beyond LaBarge and spent the next 3 days and nights searching for a trail that would lead him back to civilization. Mulholland has pastored the small congregation at Fort Bridger's Shepherd of the Valley Lutheran Church for almost 26 years. Cowboy State Daily's Claire McFarland writes that while Mulholland was battling snow, cold, and thirst, his wife and his congregation were waging a different sort of battle.
I think it was interesting that while the pastor was out there having to contemplate the physical realm and the logic of his situation and be very practical, his congregation and congregations across the state were avidly praying for him. And his wife was having what she described as a faith ultimatum. She said, in a situation like that, either God is or he isn't.
Although search and rescue teams from surrounding counties worked night and day to locate Mulholland, it was 2 hunters who ultimately crossed paths with him and finally escorted him to safety. And despite repeated efforts to do away with the dreaded clock change in Wyoming, Cowboy State residents and most Americans will grudgingly set their clocks back an hour early Sunday morning. Wyoming and 18 other states have passed legislation calling for making daylight savings time permanent, but only if federal law allows it, according to Cowboy State Daily's Leo Wolfson.
All of Wyoming's neighboring states, except for Nebraska and South Dakota, have passed their own version of this legislation. So Wyoming certainly has some standing with this. There's been 19 states total, counting Wyoming, that have done this. And federally, there's been some bills brought to try to basically make daylight savings time permanent.
But not everyone is supportive of making that change permanent. There's some concern that the move would affect the mental health of children who have to go to school when it's very dark. And some ranchers are also opposed, saying they'd have to do a lot of their morning chores in the dark for longer. And that's today's news. Get your free digital subscription to Wyoming's only statewide newspaper by hitting the subscribe button on CowboyStateDaily.com. I'm Wendy Core for Cowboy State Daily.